Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. But that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. The last, final frontier. Since early days, humankind is not only trying to find answers to the reason of its existence, but also to the unknown final frontier, life after death. Humankind cannot live forever, and when we die, what will we find beyond the grave? Stone Age people, ancient Egyptians, Greeks and Romans were fascinated by life after death. Philosophers, poets and playwrights have all expounded their theories. Artists give their own impression of life after death. In keeping with traditional views, John Milton's Paradise Lost and William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell are two prominent literary classics that also influence society's attitudes and views regarding the afterlife. Arguably the most influential work, though, was Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, the three-part poetry epic which journeyed through Inferno, Purgatorio and Paradiso, or Hell, Purgatory and Heaven. Towards the end of the 20th century, a phenomenon arose in which people reported near-death experiences, otherwise known as NDEs, in which they encountered some form of afterlife reality. Modern medicine began referring to these occurrences as the Lazarus phenomenon, after the biblical character that was revived by Jesus 4 days after his supposed death. This phenomenon of NDEs, in which revised patients report an extension of consciousness beyond clinical death, has been documented for centuries.
Call back home. I'm in agony in this fire. shafts of radiance came out from the central core. It was like a white fire. Phenomenal radiance in the central core. From that, I watched this brilliant light piercing out. And I thought, even the stars in the universe, even the constellations must find their energy source from this focal point. What is that light? Words appeared in front of my eyes. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. I wonder if I could just see his face. I'll know who God is. As I got within a few feet of his presence, I began to place my face into the light.
And then, as I'm going down into this, I begin to look into the flames, and I begin to see people. I mean, there's thousands. There's too many. I don't know how many people are in the flames, and they're screaming, and their arms are flailing, and their bodies are rolling, and they're burning all over. They're burning like in liquid fire.
But what exactly is an NDE experience, medically speaking? As the name NDE implies, these people have some event in which they are severely physically compromised. Generally, there's a severe physical malady that occurs suddenly or at the end of a chronic illness. NDEs are often associated with cessation of heart function and cessation of breathing function, or very often both. As a consequence of that, within 10 seconds following cessation of heart function, blood stops flowing in the brain, and the EEG, which measures the electrical brain activity, goes flat, implying that there is no electrical activity in the brain. Given that when you stop breathing and your heart stops, and given that 10 seconds after that the EEG, the measure of electrical brain activity, goes absolutely flat, it's medically inexplicable that near-death experiencers are having a conscious experience. For years, however, some medical researchers had dismissed the NDE phenomenon as hallucinations caused by the dying body releasing a chemical cocktail as a means of defense against the pain and shock of impending death. That theory was dented in 1984 by an extraordinary medical emergency in the American West Coast city of Seattle. Maria, a migrant worker from Eastern Europe, was rushed to hospital after she collapsed at a friend's home. In the ICU, a medical team tried to stabilize her condition without success. Her heart stopped beating. Maria's body was lifeless for several minutes, but the doctors kept on trying to bring her back to life. Then they suddenly realized that the heart monitor showed some life. Maria was supposed to be dead. Maria came back to life and immediately told an amazing story. She saw everything while she left her body. She could see the medical team working on her. She then left the ICU to the roof of the hospital, and as she went up, saw a tennis shoe. No one believed her story, but her friends immediately ran up to the roof and with absolute shock found the tennis shoe exactly as described by Maria. Maria's experience could not be anything other than the absolute truth. If the out-of-body experience was purely a mental aberration, how could she have seen a physical reality that could later be verified? After Maria's revelation, other similar stories began to emerge of NDE patients undergoing out-of-body experiences and being able to relate verifiable details that they could not have imagined. Can we still say NDEs are hallucinations?
I think in terms of, yes, certainly in terms of the consistency of the testimonies in near-death experiences, it suggests that the experience is a reality which is not purely the product of brain chemicals, because, I mean, we know from studies of the effects of drugs ordinarily that if you give one person a drug and then give the same drug to another person, they'll have two completely different experiences. There might be broad similarities, but not the level of consistency you find with a near-death experience.
No, there's no person can dispute whether these experiences are the normal functioning of the brain at the point of death or rather represent some sort of chaotic hallucinatory activity. Remember, hallucinations involve the perception of something that isn't real. So when we die, we're alert, we're conscious, we're aware of this reality, so certainly people having near-death experiences accurately describe what's happening in this reality. But the key element of the near-death experience is that we perceive, I say we, as all of us are going to have this experience, we perceive another reality superimposed over this one.
If NDEs are not hallucinations, is heaven and hellish experience reality?
I think in terms of whether the places visited in near-death experiences, either heavenly or in terms of a hellish type experience, are real, is something that's beyond proof. Ultimately, one would have to die in order to determine whether there was a genuine heaven or a genuine hell. But what's very clear from a psychological perspective is that the intensity of the experience is lived as real whilst the person's having it. So for these people, whether or not there really ends up actually being a heaven or a hell, they feel the experience is real for them at that moment in time. There's certainly no way we can deduce or prove that if someone sees an afterlife and it's heavenly, that heaven exists, because you'd have to die in order to really truly find that out.
When we die, we take that heaven and hell with us, and we fit where we belong. We die the life we live. Near-death experiences don't make a sinner into a saint, necessarily, but doesn't change much, but you become more aware. And a serial killer, when they die, would become more aware of how much of us, and punishment they inflicted on others.
Yeah.
And that's that condition.
Yeah.
The question then arises, can there then be such a thing as an objective heaven or hell? Or are these places merely the product of religious superstition? Is there actual scientific evidence to support their existence? Today's scholars and religious figures are certainly divided. Some talk of reincarnation, others of assimilation into the universal life force. Nobody knows for sure.
I'm a pastor.
Or do they?
I stole money from the church and I lied. Help me.
Different cultures and religions experience NDEs differently. Even people of the same religion interpret NDEs differently. The question is, do the Muslim or Christian heaven and hell, for example, appear differently when experiencing an NDE? Reports of these so-called hellish or negative near-death experiences that closely resemble biblical imagery have sparked global interest in the ongoing debate to such an extent that research is currently being conducted by both the academic and scientific mainstream. Certainly the debate has been going on for centuries. Some claim hell is a human invention. Today, it's not just the scientific community that is evaluating the preconceptions of a heaven and hell, but also religious institutions. Some churches even go so far as to say that there isn't a hell, and question whether these archaic beliefs are still valid in the 21st century. But how do these hellish experiences appear?
When we die, we go through a fairly rigorous series of events. And a picture that a child drew of nearly drowning, I think, illustrates this better than anything else. And we can see in this picture, the first thing he draws when he nearly drowned is he states that hands reached inside his body and pulled him out. Doesn't identify who these hands belong to. But then these hands plunged him into darkness.
As I'm standing there, I become acutely aware that the darkness isn't just physical, but there is a spiritual component to it. An evil, cold, encroaching. It's like the atmosphere is permeated with a cold sensation, a chill or a terror. Visible eyes of something or someone checking me out. The darkness had it in the